Mike Tyson, the youngest heavyweight champion ever, one of the greatest boxers of all time, and a brutal knockout artist whose fights resemble executions more than they do boxing matches. He had 40 knockouts throughout his professional career and was most known for his multitude of first-round finishes. But behind all the knockouts, the fame, the glory, was an extremely intelligent boxer who knew every part of the science and had studied it for his entire life. Cus D'Amato, Mike Tyson's trainer and father figure, taught him the Peekaboo method, one of boxing's most iconic fighting styles. The Peekaboo style wasn't initially created for the shorter man, but previous boxers like Jose Torres and the more well-known Floyd Patterson had enough success using the technique to become successful world champions. It wouldn't be stupid, however, to assume that the style was directly made for Tyson. It fit him perfectly. The head movement, the focus on speed and power, and the malicious intent were all attributes of Tyson's physicality and attitude, and this perfect match of style and fighter is what made Iron Mike Tyson such an amazing athlete. To start off, the Peekaboo stance is very different from the traditional boxing stance. The feet are much more squared off, with the shoulders both facing the opponent directly. This is usually a big no-no in boxing fundamentals, as you are almost always told to have your lead shoulder up and forward to defend your chin and lengthen your lead hand's reach, as well as increase your rear hand's power. Mike Tyson, however, had incredible strength in both hands and focused heavily on lateral shifting movements for defensive and offensive purposes, which can be accomplished faster with a more squared-up stance. Although being more square can inhibit forwards and backwards movement, Tyson had an answer to this as well. Oftentimes, after distance is made either by opponents or Tyson's empathy, Mike would pressure forward more casual before exploding into head movement or punches, depending on the situation. But one small detail to this casual pressure made this technique a lot more effective. Opposed to moving forward while maintaining your stance's width, Mike would intentionally step with his back foot first, making his stance more narrow, before stepping in with his lead. This is something that both Rocky Marciano and Sonny Liston also used, with Marciano doing it while pressuring, and Liston doing it while jabbing. This is obviously risky, since it makes your base worse, but it allowed Tyson to not only cover distance quicker, but do it while looking much more relaxed, giving his opponent a false sense of security that would leave them vulnerable to Mike's incredibly quick combinations.
Perpetual motion machine so far. This isn't going to go too long.
Moving on from his stance, Tyson also had very dynamic footwork. In his prime, he was always balanced and could cut angles at will. On top of this, he could fight comfortably in orthodox and southpaw, and would frequently change from one to the other during his fights. He actually changed his stance mid-combination at times, and one of the more notable examples of this was his leaping punches. Tyson is often compared to Joe Frazier for a multitude of reasons, one being their mutual liking to the gazelle hook, a leaping lead hook that covers distance while throwing. One thing that differentiated their gazelle hooks, however, was Tyson's footwork. Mike would often change his stance mid-air right after exploding into the punch for a better angle. He would also regularly drag his foot while throwing rear overhands, hooks, or crosses. This is very similar to one of Joe Louis's staple techniques, where he would move his weight forward with his cross and drag his rear foot with the punch. I talk about this more in depth in my Joe Louis breakdown, which I'll link in the description. While all the stance changes and narrow pressure steps were big parts of Tyson's style, they couldn't be done without Tyson's amazing head movement. A signature part of Mike's slips were his bobbing, a unique style of movement that prioritizes moving with your hips and obliques, opposed to turning towards the direction you're slipping. As you can see from Mike Tyson's physique, he had a very wide frame, with developed obliques, and that combined with his explosivity allowed him to bob very quickly. His lateral, squared-off stance, and his ability to pressure while shifting weight side to side amplified this type of head movement even more. This kind of movement played into his offense too. With his upper body moving from one side to the other in such an exaggerated way, when he threw a punch his weight would whip to the other side, generating immense power. Of course he didn't always do this, however. Mike's style was built off of unpredictability in where he was and where he was going to be. A common technique he used was throwing hooks from one side while not actually shifting his weight to the other, instead twisting his shoulders and only moving his weight in between his feet instead of fully across the center line. This allowed him to generate a ton of power while staying in the same general position. making his movements erratic and hard to predict, as his opponents didn't know if he was going to go across the center line or stay on the same side. This is something I personally use a lot, since I'm very short for my weight and don't have long arms. And he didn't just do this with hooks, he did this with uppercuts and even jabs. Notice how he drops his weight before the uppercut and then explodes upwards, almost flipping his entire chest from facing downwards and then to the sky. Tyson was also very comfortable slipping to the inside. When he jabbed, he would usually go one of two ways, either jabbing and twisting his back and shoulders before slipping to his lead side, or jabbing while shifting his weight to his power side and his back foot. If he did the former, he could throw hooks or uppercuts from the lead side, and if he did the latter, he would very often throw his weight forward with an overhand or fore. The reason the second one especially was so effective was because all of his weight travels from his back leg and rear side to his front leg and lead side, which added a ton of power. And he would add even more power to his punches by oftentimes dropping his other hand. Now, this sounds like a horrible idea, since it leaves you exposed and vulnerable. But, as Mike always did in his prime, he had an answer to this as well. When he did throw punches like this, it was either a counterpunch that exploited his opponent's offense, or it was from an angle. And when it was from an angle, it was usually so extreme that his opponent wasn't even facing him, letting Mike throw whatever he wanted. If you watch interviews with Mike, you've probably already heard about this tactic. Hit to the body, then come up to the head.
And keep his mind preoccupied with the body punches and the other two head punches that come to the head.
The opponent will change their guard to focus on the body shot, allowing you to, if you're quick enough, exploit the opening and punch high. Mike used the same strategy but changed it up a little. Because he was so quick and could throw power without needing to shift his weight, he would double, triple, or sometimes even quadruple up on one side of the body before throwing the same side to the head. This is something that Sugar Ray Robinson was a master at, and many quick boxers tend to find success in this strategy. When you first watch Mike Tyson, it can feel like watching a bull, running through opponents without skill or smarts, only brawn and aggression. But looking into his technique, you realize that Tyson was a combative genius. He studied the science, read books on it, and mastered the art of war early enough to become the youngest heavyweight champion ever.